Jake Riley gripped the pickup steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. A sign reading, "Welcome to Cedar Springs, Wyoming. Population 2,457, flashed by on the left side of the road. The first surge of panic hit his chest when he drove past the old water tower with its peeling paint. 13 years. That's how long it had been since he was last here, among Wyoming's vast spaces, under the boundless sky that now hung over him like a heavy blanket. Just breathe, he commanded himself, turning up the radio to drown out the noise in his head. The country song was one of those that had been playing even before he left for service. Time seemed to have stood still here. It was both reassuring and terrifying at the same time. 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. 7 years of service, which ended 8 months ago after a roadside bomb left him with titanium pins in his right leg, an occasional tremor in his hands, and nightmares that wouldn't let up. Plus, honorable discharge papers, a bunch of medals, and no plan for the future. Jake slowed down as the road began to climb in steep curves up the hills. The 1992 Ford he had purchased for cash 3 days ago struggled on the inclines. Visiting a lawyer in Cheyenne wasn't in his plans when he left Walter Reed Military Medical Center. But 2 weeks ago, a letter came notifying him that Uncle Harry, his father's brother, whom he had only seen a few times in his life, had died and left him a piece of land. Who leaves a ranch to a nephew they barely know? Jake thought, turning onto the dirt road indicated in his GPS. The dirt track, marked by a faded mailbox with Riley written on it, wound upward for another couple of miles. Each turn seemed endless, revealing only more slopes and hills. When he finally reached the summit, he involuntarily hit the brakes. Before him stretched a valley, surrounded on 3 sides by rocky slopes that transitioned into higher mountains on the horizon. In the middle of the valley stood an old farmhouse with a spacious porch. A bit further, there were 2 neglected stables, several small corrals, and a large pasture reaching the hillsides. The house looked run down but quite habitable. The stables were in worse condition. The roof of one had partially collapsed. But what impressed Jake most was the sense of space. After years spent among desert sands, military bases, and cramped hospital wards, this openness was both frightening and amazingly calming. He slowly drove to the house and stopped the car. For several minutes, he just sat there, listening to sounds almost non-existent on military bases. The singing of birds, the rustle of wind in the grass, the distant buzzing of insects. Finally, he forced himself to get out of the car, and his leg responded with a dull pain when he stood on solid ground. "Riley?" came a gruff voice. Jake turned sharply, instinctively lowering his hand to his side where a gun would normally be. An elderly man in a worn cowboy hat, with a weathered face and gray mustache, slowly emerged from the stable. "Sorry to startle you, son." The man raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm Bill Henderson, your uncle's neighbor. Been looking after the place since Harry passed on." Jake exhaled, trying to reduce the tension in his shoulders. "Jake Riley," he replied, extending his hand. Bill shook it firmly. "I know who you are. Harry kept your picture on the mantelpiece. Was proud of you." Jake frowned. He barely remembered Uncle Harry. Just a few visits in childhood before his parents divorced and his mother took him to Ohio. "Hardly anything to be proud of," he muttered. Bill looked at him intently, then simply nodded. "I left some supplies in the house. The refrigerator works. Harry paid for electricity a year in advance." "Thanks. "But I'm unlikely to stay long," Jake replied. "I'll probably sell this place." Bill shrugged. "That's your right. But before making a decision, you might want to see what else Harry left you." He headed toward the far stable, motioning for Jake to follow him. Jake hesitated, but curiosity won out. He followed Bill past empty corrals to the stable that looked newest among all the buildings. The stable smelled of hay, leather, and horses. When Jake's eyes adjusted to the semi-darkness, he noticed 5 stalls. 3 contained horses, an old bay stallion with a white spot on its forehead, a gray gelding that must have been black in its youth, and an elegant chestnut mare with white socks on its legs. "These are Harry's last rescues," Bill explained, nodding at the horses. "He started a rescue service about 5 years ago. Took in horses from slaughterhouses, auctions, complicated situations. Gave them a last chance." Jake approached the stalls. The bay horse calmly looked at him. The gray appeared wary but calm. The chestnut mare turned away, displaying indifference. "Bon Bon, Sergeant, and Lady," Bill introduced them, pointing to each in turn. "Harry rescued Sergeant from an auction 2 years ago. He was a police horse until he became too weak for service. Bon Bon was one of the first he rescued, old but still good for gentle rides. And Lady?" He hesitated. "Lady is a special case." Something in his tone made Jake look more closely at the chestnut mare. "What's wrong with her?" he asked. "She was purebred, a racehorse. Injured her leg during races. The owners decided to get rid of her. Harry took her just before he—" Bill didn't finish the sentence. "He worked with her in the last months, but she's distrustful, nervous, needs a special approach." Jake approached Lady's stall. The mare looked back at him, and in her eyes, he saw something familiar, a mixture of fear, pain, and defiance. She snorted and abruptly turned away, retreating to the far corner of the stall. "Trusts no one," Bill murmured. "Even Harry needed time to earn her respect." Jake couldn't take his eyes off the horse. In her tense muscles, her alert posture, he recognized his own reactions. "Don't trust. Be prepared for pain. Keep your distance." Harry kept journals about all the horses, Bill continued. Their history, treatment, diet, all of it's in his office. "I've been feeding them and looking after them." But he hesitated. "I have my own ranch and my own animals. Can't give them as much attention as they need." Jake finally looked away from Lady. "I'm not a stable hand," he said sharply, "and I didn't promise to take care of them." "Of course not," Bill replied calmly. "But before selling, you have to decide what to do with them. Harry left a small fund for their upkeep, but it won't last long." Jake felt irritation growing inside. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't asked for responsibility for 3 old horses, hadn't asked to be rescued from Washington, where endless psychotherapy sessions and medication had turned into a blurred circle of days. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "For now, I'll stay a few days while I sort out the paperwork." Bill nodded and turned back to the stable door. "My ranch is 5 miles west of yours. Phone numbers attached to the refrigerator. Call if you need help." After Bill left, Jake returned to the house. The wooden stairs creaked under his weight. He unlocked the door with the key he had received from the lawyer. Inside, the house was surprisingly clean, simple, but cozy. A living room with a fireplace, a small dining room, a kitchen with somewhat outdated but functional appliances. The second floor consisted of 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. In the master bedroom, which obviously belonged to Uncle Harry, Jake found personal items neatly arranged, as if his uncle knew the time had come and had prepared everything for his successor. On the nightstand stood a framed photograph, a young Harry Riley with a small boy on his shoulders. Jake picked up the photo, trying to remember that day, but his memory didn't respond. His attention was drawn to the office across from the bedroom. There was more disorder here. A desk covered with papers, shelves filled to capacity with journals and books about horses. On the wall hung photographs of various horses, dozens of animals that Uncle Harry had probably rescued. Jake sat down in the chair at the desk, reviewing the documents. Medical records, bills from veterinarians, progress journals. Uncle Harry took his rescue mission seriously. In one folder, Jake found documents for the land, funding records, and the last will and testament. To my nephew Jacob Riley, I leave all my property, including the Last Chance Ranch, all buildings, land, and animals, in the hope that he will find here what he is looking for, as I did. Jake set the paper aside, feeling a strange tightness in his throat. He went to the office window, which overlooked the stables. The evening sun was coloring the hills with golden light, creating long shadows. He saw Lady emerge from the stable into a small corral, moving gracefully despite a barely noticeable limp in her right foreleg. The mare raised her head as if sensing his gaze, and for a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Jake didn't believe in signs or fate. 13 years of war and trauma had uprooted any naivety. But something in this moment, in this animal that, like him, carried invisible wounds, made him hesitate. He unpacked his bag, took out a bottle of whiskey, and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Behind him stood an empty house, filled with someone else's memories and unexpected responsibility. Before him stretched lands that now belonged to him, along with 3 horses that needed care. A few days, he thought, taking a swig from the bottle. I'll sort out the papers, find where to place the horses, and sell this place. The plan was simple, rational. But as dusk turned to night and the stars shone over the valley with a brightness you couldn't see in the city, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Uncle Harry had left him more than just a piece of land. He had left him a challenge, and although Jake wasn't ready to accept it, something inside, something almost forgotten over the years of service, quietly responded. A horse neighed in the stable, the sound cutting through the night silence, reminding him of unfinished business, of another decision that would have to be made, another chance that needed to be given, perhaps not just to the horses. Jake woke from a nightmare before dawn. He sat up abruptly in bed, heart racing wildly, his shirt soaked with sweat. In the darkness of the unfamiliar room, he was momentarily disoriented. Not a military cot, not a hospital bed. It took several deep breaths to remember where he was. Last Chance Ranch, Wyoming, Uncle Harry, inheritance. Knowing he wouldn't be able to fall asleep again, he got up, feeling the familiar pain in his right leg. The titanium pins had become part of his body, but never allowed him to forget their presence, especially in the morning or when a storm was approaching. Limping to the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face, avoiding looking at his reflection. In the kitchen, he found an old coffee maker and a can of coffee. While the water boiled, he took pills from his bag, painkillers and those that help cope. That's what the psychiatrist at Walter Reed called them. Jake swallowed them with a gulp of water, then added a third, a sleeping pill that hadn't worked last night. With trembling fingers, he poured coffee into the coffee maker, much more than needed. Strong black coffee was his only connection to the daily routine formed by decades of military service. The coffee was still brewing when he heard noise from outside. Soft neighing, then the sound of hooves against wood. Instinctively, he went to the kitchen window overlooking the stables. The stars were still shining brightly in the dark sky, but the first signs of dawn were already appearing on the eastern horizon. In the dim light, Jake could barely make out the figure of a horse in the corral. The chestnut one, Lady. She stood by the fence, nervously pacing. Jake took a mug of coffee and went out onto the porch. The cold mountain air hit him, but it felt good, a reminder that he was alive. He sat in the old rocking chair, holding the mug with both hands for warmth. From here, he could see Lady better. The mare moved around the corral, stopping, listening, then moving again. She seemed no less restless than he was. When the first rays of sun touched the valley, Jake finally got up. Yesterday's conversation with Bill reminded him of the responsibility he had suddenly received. The horses needed to be fed. In the stable, Jake found supplies of feed, neatly labeled with each horse's name. A note from Bill explained the feeding schedule. Sergeant, the old police horse, calmly accepted food from his hands. Bonbon, the bay stallion, was friendlier, snorting and nudging his hand. But when he approached Lady's stall, the mare retreated to the far corner. "Don't want to socialize?" Jake muttered. "Well, I understand." He put the bucket of feed in the stall and stepped back. While he tended to the other stalls, cleaning them and filling the water troughs, he furtively watched Lady. The mare waited until he moved away before slowly approaching the feed. Even as she ate, her ears were directed toward him, her eyes occasionally glancing, tracking his every movement. "It'll take at least a year for her to trust you," a voice came from the stable door. Jake turned and saw Bill standing, leaning against the doorframe. "Not planning to stay that long," Jake replied, returning to his cleaning. Bill came closer, examining the fresh shavings of straw. "I see you've already started." "It's the minimum I can do while deciding what will happen to them." Bill nodded, walked past him to Lady's stall. The mare didn't retreat from him as sharply as from Jake, but still kept her distance. Harry hoped she would be his greatest success. Horse psychologist, that's what he called himself. Bill smiled nostalgically, said he understood them better than people. "And you," Jake asked, "do you understand horses too?" "Enough to know that they, like people, have their fears, joys, and stories." Bill turned to him. "Raised 3 children on my ranch. All grown up now, living in cities. They come for Christmas." Jake silently nodded, not knowing how to respond to this personal information. "Harry said you were in Afghanistan," Bill continued. "And in Iraq," Jake replied briefly, tensing. This was a topic he avoided. "My oldest son served too, infantry, returned 3 years ago." Again, that silent solidarity between military families. Jake felt both irritation and strange comfort. "Lexi Foster will be coming by this afternoon," Bill changed the subject. "She's the veterinarian, comes once a month to check on the horses." Harry insisted on regular checkups, especially for Lady. "Her leg." "I can pay," Jake interrupted. "Already paid for. Like I said, Harry left a fund for their upkeep. Enough for a few more months." After Bill's departure, Jake returned to the house. He checked the refrigerator, finding more supplies than expected. Milk, eggs, bacon. On the desk in the office, he found Uncle Harry's account book. Clearly, Harry kept meticulous records of the ranch expenses. By his calculations, the fund would last approximately 4 months if no extraordinary expenses arose. Then troubles would begin. Jake flipped through pages with notes about rescued horses. Some were transferred to new owners, others remained on the ranch. The 3 current residents were the last ones Harry rescued. His reading was interrupted by the sound of an approaching car. Through the office window, he saw an old pickup stopping near the house. A woman who appeared to be in her 30s jumped out, slim, with dark hair gathered in a casual ponytail. She retrieved a large medical case and headed toward the stable without knocking on the house door. Jake frowned, then remembered the veterinarian, Lexi Foster. He slowly got up and went to the stable, watching as she was already talking to the horses, as if to old friends. "Dr. Foster?" he addressed her, stopping at the door. She turned, holding a stethoscope. "Just Lexi," she replied, assessing him with a glance. "And you must be Harry's nephew. Bill warned me you were here." She extended her hand, and Jake shook it. Her handshake was firm and confident. "Jake Riley. Been here long?" "Yesterday." She nodded, continuing to examine Bonbon. "Harry talked about you a lot." Jake raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really? I barely knew him." "He knew you, read all the news about your unit, followed your career." She moved on to Sergeant. "Was proud of you." Jake decided to change the subject. "How are they? The horses?" "Bonbon and Sergeant? Great for their age." She was writing something on a tablet. "Lady is gradually recovering. Her leg will never be fully healthy, but it's stable. Harry did a tremendous amount of work with her." "What kind of work?" "Therapy. Physical and psychological, if you can say that about a horse." She approached Lady's stall, and the mare, to Jake's surprise, didn't retreat. Lady was an East Coast racing champion. The trainers used aggressive methods. When she broke her leg during a race, her owners decided it was cheaper to get rid of her than to treat her. Jake moved closer, watching as Lexi carefully examined the mare's front right leg. "So is it right, giving last chances to horses?" Lexi looked at him warily. "What do you mean? Wouldn't it be more humane to—" Jake didn't finish the sentence. "Put them down?" Lexi straightened up, a challenge in her eyes. "Maybe if they were suffering without hope of recovery. But Bonbon has about 5 more years of happy life. Sergeant, perhaps a little less. And Lady could live another 15 years with proper care." "I don't know if I can provide that for them," Jake said honestly. "I'm here temporarily." Lexi looked at him for a long time, as if evaluating. "You know why Harry started rescuing horses?" she asked, returning to her examination. "After Aunt Martha died, he was left alone. The ranch, which was once full of life, became empty. One day he went to an auction in Cheyenne and saw Bonbon, an old horse that nobody wanted. Harry said that in Bonbon's eyes, he saw himself." She finished the examination and began gathering her equipment. "Harry didn't just rescue horses, Jake. The horses rescued him." After she left, Jake remained in the stable, pondering these words. He approached Lady's stall, stopping at a distance that wouldn't frighten her. "So we're both stuck here, huh?" he said quietly. The mare studied him with dark eyes. "Both don't know what's next." He opened Harry's journal about Lady, which he had found in the office, and began reading notes about her progress. Every day, Harry spent time with her, just sitting by the stall, then slowly entering inside, gradually reducing the distance. All without rushing, without pressure, just presence. Day 43. Lady allowed me to touch her neck, just for a moment, but it's progress. Wounds heal slowly, both those on the body and those in the soul. Jake pulled a chair up to Lady's stall and sat down. The mare tensed, retreating a bit further. "It's okay," he said calmly. "I'll just sit here." He began slowly flipping through the journal, reading aloud some of Harry's entries, not for Lady, but for himself, to fill the silence. Time passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the open stable doors. Jake continued sitting, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the mare. Gradually, Lady seemed to get used to his presence, though she remained alert. When it began to darken, he stood up, feeling pain in his leg from sitting in one position for so long. "Until tomorrow," he said to Lady, leaving the journal on the chair, "though I don't know why I'm doing this." That night, lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence, so deep it rang in his ears. In recent years, his life had always been filled with noise, the rumble of explosions, the hum of transport, the continuous murmur of hospital monitors. This silence was almost unbearable. He turned on his side, thinking about the decision he had to make, a decision that was becoming more complicated with each hour spent here. Selling the ranch would be rational. He had no experience in this business, no knowledge of agriculture or animals, but the thought of what would happen to the horses, especially Lady, he saw her eyes again, distrustful, frightened, but not broken. There was something in them that reminded him of the looks of soldiers who had seen too much, those who had experienced trauma but continued to fight. The phone rang beside the bed, yanking him from his thoughts. He answered without looking at the screen. "Riley. Captain Riley, it's Mike Dawson." Jake immediately recognized the voice of his former sergeant. "Just checking on you." "Dawson." Jake sat up in bed, feeling a mixture of joy and discomfort. "Everything's fine. I'm in Wyoming." "In Wyoming? What the hell are you doing there?" "Long story. Inherited a ranch." "Boy, you're full of surprises," Dawson smiled. "Some people here are asking about you. Guys from the platoon. Thought about organizing a meetup next month in San Diego." Jake hesitated. He hadn't seen most of his comrades since the explosion. Wasn't ready to answer questions about his recovery, to see sympathy in their eyes. "I don't know, Dawson. I need to figure out this place." "Of course, I understand. Just know the door's open." There was a pause. "How's your leg?" "Fine, day by day." "And the dreams?" Jake clenched his teeth. "Everything's under control." "All right, Captain, but if you want to talk—" "Thank you, Sergeant," Jake gently interrupted. "I'll let you know about the meetup." After the call, he couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts wandered between the past and the uncertain future. Eventually, he got up, put on a jacket, and went out onto the porch. The night was cold, but the stars were incredible. Millions of dots of light in the black sky. He took a few steps from the house, then approached the corral. The moonlight was bright enough for him to make out the silhouettes of the horses. Bonbon and Sergeant slept standing, leaning against each other. Lady stood apart, her silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky. She wasn't asleep. She was watching. "Don't trust this place?" Jake quietly asked. "Neither do I." He sat on the bottom rail of the corral, feeling the night air penetrating to his bones. The night silence was broken only by the soft sound of the horses breathing. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Jake didn't feel the need to fill this silence, neither with alcohol, nor television, nor any of the ways he had tried to drown out his thoughts in recent months. Lady took a step toward him, then stopped, as if undecided whether to approach. Jake remained motionless, watching her in the moonlight. The mare took another careful step, then another. Slowly, so gradually that it was almost imperceptible, she came closer to him at a distance of a few steps, closer than she had ever approached before. "Hello, beautiful," he murmured. "Can't sleep either?" The mare pricked her ears, catching his every word. Jake remained motionless, giving her the opportunity to determine the distance. She didn't come closer, but she didn't retreat either. She just stood there, in the moonlight, watching him, and he watched her. Bill said it would take a year to earn Lady's trust. Perhaps he was right. But right then, in the silent company of an injured animal under the boundless starry sky, Jake felt something beginning to shift inside him. Something hard and frozen that had begun to fall, very slowly, drop by drop. He still didn't know how long he would stay here, didn't know what he would do with the ranch. But for the first time since his arrival, he thought that maybe at the Last Chance Ranch, there was indeed something for him. If not answers, then at least space to search for questions he had been afraid to ask himself for many years. After a week, Jake found his rhythm of life on the ranch. He would wake before dawn every morning, often from nightmares that wouldn't leave him, though they were becoming a bit quieter. The first cup of coffee on the porch became a ritual as he watched light gradually fill the valley. Then came morning feeding of the horses, cleaning the stables, and small repair work around the ranch that he began doing almost unconsciously. This morning, when he entered the stable with buckets of feed, he was greeted by a quiet sound resembling a moan. Jake's heart raced when he saw Sergeant lying in the corner of his stall. The old horse was trying to get up, but kept sinking back down, breathing heavily. "Sergeant?" Jake hurried to the stall, carefully opening the door. "What happened, buddy?" The horse raised his head, his eyes dimmed with pain. Jake knelt beside the animal, carefully examining it. His hand on Sergeant's neck felt intense heat. Without thinking, Jake pulled out his phone. "Lexi, this is Jake Riley. Sergeant is sick." He described the symptoms, trying to stay calm, but couldn't hide the anxiety in his voice. "How quickly can you get here?" "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she replied. "In the meantime, try to cool him down. Wet towels with cold water and place them on his neck." Jake found towels in the utility room, soaked them in a bucket of cold water, and returned to Sergeant. All this time, he kept talking to the horse, reassuring him in a low, steady voice. "Hang in there, old man. Help is on the way. You're a strong boy, aren't you? A police horse." From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. Lady was standing by the partition, watching. Her ears were pointed forward, eyes not leaving Sergeant. Bonbon had also approached his door, snorting with anxiety. "Everything will be fine," said Jake, not knowing whether he was reassuring the horses or himself. The time until Lexi's arrival stretched into eternity. Jake didn't leave Sergeant's side, regularly changing compresses on his neck, gently stroking his nose, watching as the old horse struggled with each breath. "You're not going to die today," he whispered. "Not on my watch." He remembered Lexi's words about how Harry rescued horses and the horses rescued him. Now, looking at Sergeant's suffering, it dawned on him how deeply he had already begun to care for these animals. So deeply that the thought of losing one of them caused physical pain in his chest. When Lexi's pickup finally stopped in front of the stable, Jake nearly groaned with relief. She entered quickly, with the determination of someone who knew what to do in a crisis situation. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, immediately kneeling beside the horse and taking out her stethoscope. "I don't know. Found him like this when I came to feed." Lexi worked efficiently. checking Sergeant's vital signs, measuring his temperature, examining his eyes and gums. "It looks like colic," she finally said. "His intestine is blocked. This can be dangerous for a horse his age." She took several bottles and syringes from her bag. "Hold his head," she instructed, drawing liquid into a syringe. Jake positioned himself near Sergeant's head, carefully holding him while Lexi injected the medication into a vein in his neck. "This is a painkiller and muscle relaxant," she explained. "It will help relax the intestine. But we need to get him up. Lying down can worsen his condition." Jake nodded, and they carefully began lifting the old horse. Sergeant tried to help, but his legs trembled with weakness. Finally, he stood up, swaying and breathing heavily. "Now we need to walk him," said Lexi. "Movement will help peristalsis." They carefully led Sergeant out of the stall to the small corral and began slowly walking him in circles. Jake held the lead, gently encouraging the horse to move despite his obvious discomfort. "Will he be okay?" asked Jake, not hiding the concern in his voice. Lexi met his gaze, her face serious. "I don't know. Honestly, colic for an old horse, it's complicated. But he's strong, and he has good care." They walked Sergeant for an hour as the medication began to take effect. Gradually, the horse began to look less tense. His breathing became more even. "He seems better," said Jake with cautious hope. "Yes, but we can't relax," Lexi replied. "The next 24 hours will be critical. He needs constant supervision." "I won't leave his side," Jake assured her. Lexi prepared a few more injections for Sergeant and left additional medications to be given in a few hours. "I'll come back this evening to check on him," she said, gathering their bag. "But if he gets worse, call immediately." As she was about to leave, she stopped and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You handled this well. If you hadn't noticed it in time." She didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. He nodded, feeling a strange gratitude for this simple contact, for these words of acknowledgement. The day turned into the longest watch of his life. He sat by Sergeant's stall, monitoring every breath and movement of the horse. He read aloud from Harry's journal, told stories from his service, not about battles or losses, but about the small moments of camaraderie he remembered best. Occasionally, he felt Lady's gaze, watching them from the neighboring stall. Her attention to her sick companion was almost human in its intensity. Around noon, Jake's phone rang. Dawson's name appeared on the screen, but he didn't answer. He couldn't talk now, couldn't shift his focus. All that mattered was Sergeant, his struggle for each breath, his gradual recovery. In the evening, when Lexi returned, Sergeant was already standing. He was weak, but the symptoms had diminished. "I think we've passed the danger," she said after completing the examination. "But he still needs care." "I'll stay with him for the night," said Jake. Brought a sleeping bag. Lexi looked at him with an evaluative gaze. "You look exhausted." "I've had worse," he replied, remembering sleepless nights on patrol, 48-hour operations without rest. She nodded, understanding that she wouldn't convince him. "I'll leave my number on speed dial. Press 1 if there's anything urgent. I'll be back tomorrow morning." After she left, Jake unrolled his sleeping bag in the empty neighboring stall. He gave Sergeant his medication and fresh water, then sat down, leaning his back against the wall, not taking his eyes off the horse. "Tough day, huh, old man?" he said quietly. "I know how that feels." He remembered his own recovery after the explosion, the endless days and nights of pain, operations, rehabilitation, the feeling of helplessness and anger. Lost in memories, he noticed his hand involuntarily reaching for his right leg, massaging the scar through his jeans. His reflections were interrupted by a soft snort. Lady was standing by the partition, looking not at Sergeant, but directly at him. Her gaze was so penetrating that Jake almost felt as if she was reading his thoughts. "What?" he asked. "Never seen damaged goods before?" The mare didn't avert her gaze, her brown eyes shining in the light of the single lamp illuminating the stable. Jake stood up and approached the partition. Lady didn't retreat, for the first time. Slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted, he raised his hand to the partition. "We're all broken here, aren't we?" he said quietly. "You, me, Sergeant. Bon probably has his story too." Jake's hand hovered in the air, not touching the mare. She could back away, but she didn't. Instead, after what seemed like an eternity, Lady took one tiny step forward and allowed her nose to lightly touch his fingers. Such a light touch that he might have imagined it if he hadn't felt the warmth of her breath on his skin. The moment lasted only a second, but for Jake, it stretched out, filling something empty inside. Then Lady stepped back, returning to the safe corner of her stall. Jake returned to his sleeping bag, feeling a strange sense of comfort. He spent the night dozing in snatches, waking every hour to check on Sergeant. The old horse was gradually regaining strength. The first rays of sunlight peeked through the cracks in the stable boards when the sound of a car was heard. Jake got up, stretching his stiff muscles, and went out to meet Lexi. "How is he?" she asked, quickly walking to the stable. "Better," Jake replied, walking alongside her. "Drank water several times during the night. The pain seems to have lessened." Lexi examined Sergeant, her movements confident and efficient. "You're right. He's much better." She straightened up with relief on her face. "We've handled the crisis." "We?" Jake repeated with a slight smile. "Yes, we," she firmly replied. "Your vigilance and care played no less a role than my medications." Jake didn't know what to say. He was used to being thanked for saved lives in combat zones, but this was something different, less dramatic, but no less real. "You found Harry's journals," said Lexi, nodding at the open notebook he had been reading to Sergeant at night. "Yes, he was very dedicated." "It's more than dedication. It was his healing," she said. "Something similar to what you handled yesterday." Their eyes met, and Jake saw something in hers that he couldn't quite define. Respect, compassion, understanding that made him look away. "I need to sleep," he said, "and take a shower. Of course, I'll stay with him for an hour or two while you rest." Jake nodded gratefully and went to the house. He turned on the shower, waiting for the water to warm up, and looked at his reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his cheeks, hair disheveled from a sleepless night. But there was something new in his eyes, a spark that wasn't there when he first arrived at the ranch. Purpose, presence. Under the hot streams of water, washing away the fatigue of the last 24 hours, Jake thought about Dawson's call he had missed. The meetup with the unit in San Diego. He was sure he wouldn't go when he received the invitation a week ago. He had no desire to see the sympathy in his comrades' eyes, to answer questions about his future. But now he had answers that he didn't have before. Unexpected answers that came in the form of an old ranch and 3 horses who needed him as much as he, it turns out, needed them. Drying himself with a towel, he reached for his phone and called Dawson. "Riley," the sergeant answered. "Everything okay?" You didn't answer yesterday. Everything's normal, Dawson. There was an emergency at the ranch. Jake paused, surprised at how natural it sounded. At the ranch, as if it had always been his place. About the meetup in San Diego. About the meetup in San Diego. Yes? I won't be able to come. The word surprised even himself. I have responsibilities here. Horses that need care. Horses? Dawson's voice sounded surprised. Captain, are you hiding something? Last time we talked, you were planning to sell the ranch. I know, but the situation has changed. Jake didn't know how to explain the transformation taking place within him. Maybe I'm not ready to sell it. You're staying? There was something like approval in Dawson's voice. For now, Jake cautiously replied, I'm taking it day by day. After a brief pause, Dawson said, That's good to hear, Captain. Really good. Maybe next time we'll organize a meetup at your ranch. Maybe, Jake replied with a slight smile. He lay on the bed, fatigue quickly overcoming him. Before drifting into sleep, he thought about Lady, about that moment when she allowed him to touch her, about Sargent, who fought for his life, and about how important it was for him, Jake, to save him. Harry didn't just rescue horses. The horses rescued him. Lexi's words echoed in his mind, taking on new meaning. Before falling asleep, Jake didn't take a sleeping pill for the first time in many months. And for the first time in a long while, his sleep was deep and without nightmares. When he woke up late in the afternoon, the sun was already beginning to set. He quickly dressed and hurried to the stable. Lexi had already left, leaving a note with instructions for Sargent. The old horse was standing, leaning against the partition, looking tired but alive. You scared me, buddy, said Jake, gently stroking his nose. But we made it, didn't we? He began the evening routine, feeding, cleaning, checking water. When he approached Lady's stall, the mare didn't retreat as usual. She stood by the partition, watching him. Jake remembered Harry's notes. Day 64. Today, Lady took a carrot from my hand. A small step, but every step is important. He took a carrot from his pocket. He had brought it from the kitchen, almost without thinking, and offered it to Lady on an open palm. The mare hesitated, her ears tense. Jake stood motionless, not pushing, just offering. And then, slowly and carefully, Lady stretched her neck and took the carrot from his hand, her soft lips barely touching his palm. A moment of trust that was more important than any medal he had ever received. Thank you, whispered Jake, not knowing whether he was thanking her for accepting his gift or for something more. Later, sitting on the porch, watching the stars, he thought about these 10 days. How quickly the ranch began to feel like home. How natural it was to care for the horses, repair fences, plan small improvements. His phone vibrated. A message from the lawyer, asking about his decision regarding the ranch. A real estate agent from Cheyenne had expressed interest in the property. Jake set the phone aside without responding. The decision that seemed so simple upon arrival had now become complicated. Could he really become the caretaker of this place? The continuer of Uncle Harry's mission? He had no experience, knowledge, confidence. But today, saving Sargent, he felt a purpose he hadn't had since his last deployment. The feeling that he was needed, that his presence mattered. And that moment with Lady, some wall inside him had begun to crumble. He went to the office and found Harry's account book. He sat at the desk with a calculator, beginning to calculate expenses, savings left from his uncle, his own military pension. Rough calculations showed that with careful planning, he could support the ranch for at least a year, possibly longer. A year. Enough time to decide if this was really what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. Enough to earn Lady's trust, as Bill had said. Enough to find out if he could be what these animals needed. He closed the book, feeling for the first time in a long time, a plan forming in his mind. Not the one he expected when he arrived here, but a plan that felt right. A plan that began to fill the emptiness he had felt since his retirement. Tomorrow he would call the lawyer, call the veterinarians who worked with Harry, begin to learn what he needed to know, begin to make this place his own, not just a home, but a mission. Last Chance Ranch. The name took on new meaning. A last chance not only for the horses, but for him as well. A chance to start again, a chance to heal. With this thought, he looked at the night sky, his soul calmer than it had been for many months. And on a distant hill, a lone wolf howled at the moon, its cry both melancholy and full of hope. Like Jake's heart, an October wind carried coolness from the hills as Jake hammered the last nail into the repaired section of the corral. He stepped back to assess his work with a sense of satisfaction. After 2 months on the ranch, his hands had hardened from work, his skin had tanned under the highland sun, and his movements had acquired a confidence that wasn't there when he first arrived. Not perfect, but it'll hold, he muttered to Bonbon, who was watching him from the neighboring corral. The old bay horse snorted, as if agreeing. Jake gathered his tools into a box and checked his watch. 10:30. Lexi was due to arrive in an hour for a routine examination of the horses, and he still needed to prepare his presentation. In Uncle Harry's office, which had now become his, Jake laid out various documents on the desk: business plan, financial calculations, marketing strategy, all newly created. In deciding not to sell the ranch, he also realized he couldn't just exist on the remains of Harry's fund and his own pension. Last Chance Ranch needed a new direction. Jake reviewed his notes once more. The idea had come a month ago when Bill casually mentioned that a farm at the edge of the county offered a therapeutic riding program for children with special needs. This made Jake think, what if Last Chance could offer something similar, but for veterans? A therapeutic program for those who, like him, returned from war with visible and invisible wounds. The plan was ambitious, perhaps even unrealistic, but the more he thought about it, the more this idea ignited his imagination. To create a place where wounded warriors could find peace and healing, as he had found. The sound of an approaching car pulled him from his thoughts. He looked out the window and saw Lexi's pickup stopping in front of the house. She got out, talking on the phone, her face serious. Jake gathered the documents into a neat stack and went out to meet her. "Yes, I understand," Lexi was saying on the phone. "No, I can't come before tomorrow morning. I have several visits today." She noticed Jake and nodded. "All right, tell him to continue giving the antibiotics. I'll be there at 8. She ended the call and sighed. Respiratory infection epidemic among horses in Riverton. Already the 4th call this morning. "Sounds serious," Jake replied. "Maybe we should postpone our checkup?" "No, I'm already here." She took her bag from the pickup. "Besides, I want to make sure Sergeant has fully recovered from the colic." They went to the stable, where Jake helped her examine all 3 horses. Sergeant, contrary to concerns, had fully recovered from his episode and now looked healthier than when Jake had first arrived. Bonbon, the oldest of the trio, had some arthritis issues but was generally holding up well. "And how's Lady doing?" asked Lexi, heading toward the chestnut mare's stall. "Better," Jake replied, not hiding his pride. This week, I started working with her in the small corral. She allows me to groom her and even briefly touch her injured leg. Lexi raised an eyebrow, impressed. Seriously? Last time she was still nervous when you approached her. We've reached an understanding, said Jake, opening the stall. Unlike previous visits, when Lady would retreat or even snort threateningly when Lexi entered, this time the mare stood calmly, only her ears moving, tracking every sound. Hello, beautiful, Lexi said softly, approaching slowly. I see you found common ground with Jaw. She carefully examined Lady, paying special attention to the injured leg. The swelling has almost disappeared, she noted, and muscle tone has significantly improved. What have you been doing with her? Just what Harry wrote down, Jake replied, gradually increasing the workload, talking to her a lot. He paused. And I think we understand each other. Lexi straightened up, studying his face. You know, Harry always said some people just have a connection with animals. I think you're one of them. Hardly, Jake shrugged, feeling uncomfortable with the compliment. I'm still a novice at all this. A novice with natural talent. She finished the examination. She's ready for more load. You can start with short rides if... When they left the stable, Jake gathered his courage. Lexi, there's something I'd like to discuss with you. Do you have a minute? Of course, she replied, though her phone was ringing again in her pocket. They sat on the porch, and Jake laid out his documents before her. I'm thinking about a new direction for the ranch, he began. Something that will help support this place financially, but also continue Harry's mission. In my own way, he explained his concept of a therapeutic program for veterans, showing figures, implementation plan, and potential funding sources, including veterans grants and possible partnerships with military organizations. I know it sounds ambitious, he concluded, but I think it could work, and I would like you to be part of it. As a veterinary consultant. Lexi silently studied the documents, her eyebrows knitted in concentration. Finally, she looked up. This is impressive, Jake, really, and so needed in this region. The nearest similar programs are hundreds of miles away. So you think it could work? He asked, feeling relief at her reaction. Yes, with the right resources. She pointed to one of the documents. But you'll need more than just me. A professional therapeutic riding instructor, perhaps a psychotherapist specializing in PTSD. I've already researched this, Jake nodded. There are grant programs that can help fund such positions. And I've contacted my former sergeant, Dawson. He has contacts in several veterans organizations. Lexi studied his face. You're serious about this, aren't you? Yes, he replied, looking into the distance at the mountains. This place, it's changed something in me. Maybe it can help others too. Lexi nodded, gathering the documents. I support you, and I'd be happy to be your veterinarian. But you'll need more horses, she added practically. I know, I've thought about that. Maybe we could rescue more horses, like Harry did. Give a chance to those in need, and at the same time, help veterans find their way. A slight blush appeared on Lexi's cheeks. You know, when you first arrived, I thought you'd just sell the ranch and leave. I'm glad I was wrong. I thought so too, Jake admitted. Her phone rang again, this time more insistently. I have to go, she said, standing up. But I'll seriously consider your proposal, and I know several people who could help. After she left, Jake returned to the stable with renewed determination. He took a brush and opened Lady's stall. How about a walk today? He asked the mare, carefully approaching with the brush. Just you and me. Let's see what your leg can do. Lady allowed him to groom her, standing calmly, only occasionally snorting when the brush passed over sensitive spots. Over these 2 months, they had come a long way, from a mare who flinched at any movement to an animal that allowed him to care for her. Jake still didn't dare to saddle her, but they practiced leading on a rope in the corral, and Lady demonstrated increasing confidence. "We'll try something new today," he said, taking out an old saddle pad. He showed it to Lady, letting her smell it, then very slowly placed it on her back. The mare tensed but didn't retreat. "Good girl," he praised. "We're not rushing." He let her get used to the weight of the pad, then carefully removed it. Enough for today. Small steps, as Harry had taught. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Jake sat down at his laptop to continue researching grant opportunities. He still wasn't sure if his plan would succeed, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hope and purpose. A phone call interrupted his concentration. "Riley," he answered. "Captain, it's Dawson." His former sergeant's voice sounded tense. "We have a problem. Jenkins is in the hospital." Jake straightened up, feeling his heart stop. "What happened?" "Suicide attempt." Dawson's voice broke. "His wife found him in time, but it's bad, Captain. Really bad." Jake closed his eyes, feeling a familiar pain. Jenkins was a young specialist in their unit, barely over 20. He had seen too much in his short time of service. "Where is he?" "Military Medical Center in Cheyenne. He was transferred yesterday." "Cheyenne, less than 3 hours drive from the ranch. I'll be there tomorrow," Jake said without hesitation. "Thank you, Captain. I'd come myself, but..." "I understand, Dawson. I'll take care of him." After the call, Jake sat in the darkness, his thoughts spinning. Jenkins wasn't the first. Over the years, too many of their comrades couldn't find peace after returning home. The suicide statistics among veterans were horrific. This call confirmed the necessity of his plan with new strength. Last chance, not just a name. For some veterans, it could literally be so. The next morning, Jake woke before dawn. He fed the horses earlier than usual and explained the situation to Bill, who agreed to look after the ranch. "Just call if anything happens," Jake said, handing him the keys. "I'll be back tonight or tomorrow morning." "Don't worry about the ranch," Bill replied. "Take care of your buddy." The drive to Cheyenne gave Jake time to think about his plan in more detail. Numbers, logistics, resources, everything spun in his head. But above all, he thought about Jenkins and about many others who struggled, as he did himself. At the hospital, he found Jenkins' room and froze at the threshold. The young soldier lay pale, with bandages on his wrists and tubes coming out of his arms. His eyes were open but empty, staring at the ceiling. "Jenkins," Jake said softly. The soldier turned his head, his eyes slowly focusing. "Captain?" His voice was hoarse from disuse. "Yes, it's me." Jake approached and sat by the bed. "Dawson said you were here." "You didn't have to come," mumbled Jenkins, turning away in shame. "Of course I did. We're family, remember?" Silence filled the room, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Jenkins spoke. "I couldn't do it, Captain. Couldn't adjust. Tried to get a job, but..." he faltered. "The nights are the worst. Nightmares. Always nightmares." "I know," Jake replied quietly. "Believe me, I know." He told Jenkins about his own struggle after retirement, about the nightmares, about the pain, about how he almost gave up before finding last chance. "I have a ranch now," he said. "In Wyoming. Old buildings, a few horses. The air is so clean, it's sometimes hard to breathe." He paused. "And I'm planning something new there. A therapeutic program for veterans. Jenkins' eyes returned to him, a spark of interest appearing. What kind of program? Jake told him about his plan. About horses that also carried wounds but were healing. About the peace he found in caring for them. About how this could help others. When you get out of here, he said, I'd like you to be the first participant in the program, if you want. The young soldier looked at him for a long time. Why are you doing this, Captain? Jake thought about Lady, about her distrust slowly turning into trust, about Sergeant, who fought for his life, about the peace he found at the ranch. Because we all deserve a second chance, he simply replied, even if we don't believe it. Before leaving the hospital, Jake met with Jenkins' doctor, discussing the possibility of including the soldier in his program after discharge. The doctor was skeptical, but open. Animal therapy shows promising results for veterans with PTSD, he acknowledged. But you'll need to work with professional therapists. I'm already researching that, Jake assured him. Returning to the ranch in the evening hours, Jake felt a determination his plan had previously lacked. Seeing Jenkins, so young and broken, reminded him why this was important. It wasn't just a business plan or a way to support the ranch. It could save lives. When he drove up to the house, it was already dark. The light on the porch was on. Bill had taken care of that. Jake wearily got out of the car and immediately headed to the stable, feeling the need to check on the horses before sleep. In the lantern light, he saw that Lady was awake, her eyes shining in the darkness. She softly neighed when he approached, a sound he had never heard from her before. A sound of greeting. Hello, beautiful, he said softly, approaching her stall. I missed you too. He opened the stall door and carefully entered, something he hadn't done before at night. Lady watched him, but didn't retreat. On the contrary, she took a step toward him, slowly and carefully, until her nose touched his shoulder in a light but unmistakable gesture of trust. Jake froze, afraid to ruin the moment. Then very slowly, he raised his hand and carefully stroked Lady's neck. The mare flinched but remained in place, allowing him this contact. You have no idea how important this is, he whispered to her. What we're doing here, it could change lives. Lady snorted, as if she understood. Perhaps she did. Almost 6 months had passed since Jake Riley arrived at Last Chance Ranch with the intention of selling it and moving on. Now this place and these animals had become not just his home, but his mission. A chance for redemption, not only for him, but for others who needed healing. With this thought, he left the stable and went to the house. Tomorrow would be busy. Plans to approve, calls to make, resources to find. But tonight, for the first time in many months, Jake Riley felt he knew what to wake up for in the morning, knew where he was heading, and that was more than he could have hoped for when he first drove through the ranch gates. In his office, he placed new notes from the hospital next to the business plan. On the top sheet, he wrote a new title, Last Chance, Healing Program for Veterans. Beneath it, he added a simple motto, because the wounds you can't see hurt the most. It was late, but Jake felt clarity and peace. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day to begin building the future. Not just for himself, but for those who were lost, as he once was. Snow lay in a thin layer on the ranch grounds, an early December breath of winter. Jake stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching as Lexi parked her pickup by the stable. Behind her, another vehicle pulled up, a dark blue sedan from which a slim, middle-aged woman with short chestnut hair emerged. "Is that her?" Jake asked as Lexi approached the porch. "Dr. Emily Chen," Lexi nodded, "one of the best psychotherapists working with veterans in the state. She liked your idea." Jake took a deep breath and straightened up. In the 3 months since visiting Jenkins in the hospital, he had turned his plan into action. The grant application had been submitted and approved, providing initial funding. 2 additional stables had been renovated, with help from Bill and several of his neighbors. The first 3 new rescued horses had recently settled at the ranch. 2 geldings and a mare, all with histories of neglect or trauma. But today was a turning point, a meeting with the psychotherapist who could become a key component of the program. "Dr. Chen," he greeted, descending the porch steps. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," she replied, her handshake firm and professional. "Lexi has told me a lot about your program. I'm interested in seeing it firsthand." Jake showed her around the ranch, pointing out the renovated stables, corrals, and a small building he had converted into a program office. Dr. Chen listened attentively, occasionally asking insightful questions. "And here are our residents," Jake said, opening the doors to the main stable. Unlike the first day when Jake arrived at the ranch, the stable was now full of life. 6 horses looked out from their stalls, and a 7th, Lady, stood in the middle of the aisle where Dawson was grooming her with long, confident strokes. "Sergeant," Jake nodded to his former comrade. Dawson turned and saluted with a half smile. "Captain, showing our guests around?" "Dr. Chen, this is Mike Dawson, my former sergeant and the program's first employee," Jake introduced. "Pleased to meet you, Doctor," said Dawson, not stopping his work with Lady. "Sorry I can't shake hands, but this lady doesn't like her grooming interrupted." Dr. Chen watched him work, her attention drawn to the scars on Dawson's arms, traces of burns similar to those Jake had seen on many soldiers who had survived IED explosions. "You seem to know what you're doing," she said. "Learning," Dawson replied. "The captain is a good teacher. And Lady," he gently patted the mare's neck, "Lady is very patient." After the tour, they gathered in the office, the simple but functional room with a wooden table, several comfortable chairs, and a laptop. "Here's our program plan," said Jake, opening a folder of documents. "We offer 6-week programs for groups of up to 5 veterans at a time. A combination of horse care, riding, meditative practices in nature, and psychological support?" asked Dr. Chen, reviewing the documents. "That would be the heart of the program if we had a qualified therapist," Jake replied, meeting her gaze. "That's why we're hoping for you." Dr. Chen said nothing for several minutes, continuing to study the materials. "We can also offer outdoor group sessions," added Lexi, breaking the silence. "We have a beautiful meadow with a view of the mountains." "Jenkins is coming next week," said Dawson, leaning against the doorframe. "He'll be our first official participant, but we'd like to have a therapist on site before he arrives." Finally, Dr. Chen looked up from the documents. "To be honest, Captain Riley, just Jake," he gently corrected. "Jake, you have a program structure, but several important components are missing. Individual therapy sessions, crisis protocols, progress evaluation system." Jake felt his hopes fading. "But," she continued with a slight smile, "that's why you need a qualified therapist, right? I can help you develop these components." "So you're interested?" Jake asked, trying to control the hope in his voice. "Yes, but with a few conditions," she raised a finger. "First, I need 3 days a week here, especially at the beginning. Second, I want to be part of the participant selection process, And third, she looked at Jake with an insight that made him feel as if she was reading his thoughts. You'll also have to participate in therapy sessions. Me? Jake asked, surprised. This is a healing program for veterans, isn't it? She asked. And you're a veteran who also needs healing. Silence fell. Jake felt his heart accelerate. He glanced at Dawson, who was looking at the floor, then at Lexi, whose eyes met his, full of quiet support. I'm not sure that's necessary, he finally said. I'm here as the program director. And that's why it's even more important, Dr. Chen gently insisted. The veterans who come here will need confidence that understanding and healing are possible, that a better world exists beyond trauma. You can show them this. Jake felt the inner walls he had so carefully built begin to crack. He looked out the window at the snow-covered hills, where Lady, freshly groomed by Dawson, was now running in a wide corral, her chestnut coat standing out against the white snow. Her movements were stronger, more confident than when he first saw her. The injured leg was still noticeable, but no longer limited her so severely. Lady still limps, he said quietly. She always will. But she's learned to move with it, live with it. As have you, replied Dr. Chen. Jake turned to her and nodded. All right, I'll be a participant too. After Dr. Chen's departure, having promised to return in 2 days with a more detailed plan for the therapeutic component, Jake stood by the corral, watching Lady. Good job, Captain, said Dawson, approaching him. Another important step. She wants me to talk about everything, Jake replied. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Dawson silently stood beside him, watching the horse. You know, he finally said, when we saved that guy in Kandahar, the one with the torn-off leg, you told him that the greatest courage is allowing others to help you. He looked at Jake. Maybe it's time to apply that advice to yourself. Jake didn't answer, but felt something shift inside him. 6 months had passed since he arrived at the ranch, full of bitterness and uncertainty. Now he had a purpose, a plan, a team forming. But Dr. Chen was right. He still carried his wounds, carefully hidden beneath layers of duty and determination. That night, after Dawson drove to his rented cottage in town, and Lexi returned to her veterinary practice, Jake sat in his office, reviewing the list of potential program participants. Besides Jenkins, who was due to arrive next week, 4 more veterans had shown interest, 2 from a local support group, and 2 recommended by Dawson. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Riley, Jake, it's Lexi. Her voice sounded tense. I have information about a horse that needs urgent help. A 2-year-old stallion from a rodeo fell during competition and broke ribs. The owners want to get rid of him. How serious are the injuries? Asked Jake, already standing up and looking for his truck keys. Serious, but not hopeless. He needs surgery and long rehabilitation. I could operate on him at my clinic, but how much will the surgery cost? Interrupted Jake. Lexi named a sum that made him wince. It exceeded the ranch's current operating budget. We're only just getting on our feet, Lexi, he said slowly. I'm not sure we can take another animal, especially with such needs. I understand. In her voice was disappointment, but not judgment. Just thought you'd want to know. After ending the call, Jake sat for a long time, looking at the financial reports. Such a sum they couldn't afford without jeopardizing the rest of the program. Rationally, he knew he couldn't save every injured horse, but the thought of the stallion being disposed of because of an injury received during a performance for human entertainment. He found Jenkins' number. The young veteran was due to arrive in 5 days as the program's first participant. Jenkins answered a sleepy voice. It's Riley. Sorry for the late call. Captain, did something happen? No. Yes. Jake wasn't sure why he called. When you arrive, I'd like you to help us with a special project. An injured horse we're rescuing. He'll need a lot of attention and rehabilitation. Of course, Jenkins' voice became animated. I can help. It won't be easy. He'll be in bad shape. Like I was when you found me, Jenkins quietly replied. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the decision forming not in his head, but somewhere deeper. All right, then I'll see you next week. He ended the call and immediately dialed Lexi. We're taking the horse. We'll find money for the surgery. Are you sure? Relief sounded in her voice. No, he answered honestly, but it's the right thing to do. The next morning, Jake stood by the truck, watching as Lexi and two veterinary technicians carefully unloaded the stallion. The animal was magnificent, tall with black coat and a white star on its forehead. But its condition was worse than Jake expected. Bandages covered most of its torso, and every movement caused trembling from pain. We gave him painkillers for transport, explained Lexi, leading the horse to a specially prepared stall. Surgery tomorrow morning. Jake slowly approached the stallion, letting him smell his hand. What's his name? He asked. The owners called him Tornado. Lexi replied, grimacing. Typical rodeo name. Jake gently stroked the horse's nose, looking into his eyes full of pain and fear. Phoenix, he said quietly. Here, you'll be Phoenix. That evening, after Lexi had left, promising to return early in the morning to prepare for surgery, Jake sat by the stall of the new horse. Phoenix dozed under the influence of painkillers, his breathing uneven but stable. I know what it's like to fall in front of a crowd, Jake said softly, and I know what it's like to start over. He opened a journal. Continuing Uncle Harry's tradition, he kept records of each horse on the ranch. On the first page for Phoenix, he wrote, Day 1, beginning of a new life. Broken, but not defeated, like all of us. Jake marveled at how quickly his life had changed. 7 months ago, he had planned to sell the ranch and move on. Now he had not only stayed, but expanded the mission begun by Harry, transforming Last Chance into something more. A place of healing not just for horses, but for people who, like him, returned from war with invisible wounds. And tomorrow, with Dr. Chen's arrival for further planning, he would take another step in his own healing, allowing someone to help him as he helped others. When the first rays of winter sun touched the stable, Jake was still sitting beside Phoenix, a hand on the horse's neck, comforting him with his presence. The beginning of a new day, another chance. The first snow had melted, giving way to February's thaw. Jake walked along the fence of the corral, watching as Jenkins slowly led Phoenix in a circle. In the 3 months since surgery, the young stallion had recovered significantly, though he still walked carefully, favoring his left side where the broken ribs had healed. Can you see the difference, Captain? Asked Jenkins when they stopped at the gate. He's getting stronger. So are you, Jake replied with a slight smile, and it was true. The young veteran arrived at the ranch poor in body and spirit, with deep shadows under his eyes and unhealed scars on his wrists. Now, after 2 months at the ranch, his cheeks had gained color, and a calmness appeared in his eyes that wasn't there before. Dr. Chen says I'm making progress, Jenkins shrugged, but pride was evident in his voice. The dreams aren't as bad, not every night at least. Jake nodded, understanding. He too had seen progress since that first group session when Dr. Chen gathered Jake, Dawson, and Jenkins in the small program office. At first, it was difficult. Impenetrable silence, general phrases to fill the void. But over time, barriers began to fall. "This is for you," said Jenkins, handing Jake a sheet of paper. "I thought about emailing it, but wanted to give it to you personally." Jake unfolded the sheet. It was an application to a local college. "Veterinary technician?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Jenkins' cheeks turned slightly red. "Lexi suggested it. Says I have a knack for it. And after working with Phoenix..." "That's wonderful, Jenkins," Jake said sincerely, feeling a wave of pride for the young man. "We might even offer you a job here after graduation." "Really?" Hope lit up in Jenkins' eyes. "Of course. I mean, we're expanding." Jake gestured toward the area where now there were 9 horses and construction of a new rehabilitation center had begun. The Last Chance program was gaining momentum. A second cohort of 4 veterans arrived last week, 2 women and 2 men, all with combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. Together with Jenkins, who stayed on as an intern, and regular visits from veterans from nearby towns, the ranch was gradually transforming into a vibrant community. "I've got to get to my meeting with Dr. Chen," said Jake, glancing at his watch. "Will you manage with Phoenix?" "Of course, Captain," Jenkins nodded, leading the stallion back to the stable. On his way to the office, Jake stopped by the corral where Dawson was conducting a session with 2 veterans, showing them how to properly saddle a horse. The former sergeant had become an integral part of the program, his natural command presence and patience making him an ideal instructor. Dawson noticed Jake and nodded before continuing his demonstration. They would talk later. They had an evening tradition of sharing a cup of coffee after the day's visitors left, discussing the program's successes and challenges. Dr. Chen's office was the brightest room on the ranch, a small room with large windows overlooking the mountains. When Jake entered, she was already waiting, with a notebook on her knees and a cup of tea on the small table beside her. "Hello, Jake," she greeted him with a warm smile. "How are you feeling today?" This question, which she asked at the beginning of each session, initially caused resistance in him. Now, after 2 months of weekly meetings, he had learned to answer honestly. "Better," he said, sitting in the chair opposite her. "Slept 6 hours without nightmares. That's a record this month." "Good. And how are your mindfulness exercises?" Jake winced. "Still hard to sit still for 15 minutes, but I'm trying." Dr. Chen nodded, not judging. "And what about what we discussed last time? Have you thought about your role here?" Jake looked away. At their last meeting, she had suggested he consider why he was so dedicated to saving others, but so reluctant to allow himself to be saved. "I thought about it," he carefully replied. "It's complicated." "Complicated, but important," she gently insisted. "Jake, you've created something beautiful here. This place heals, but I still see you holding your pain separate from all this, as if by helping others, you can avoid your own healing." Jake felt the familiar tension in his chest, a defense mechanism that activated whenever the conversation got too close to his deep wounds. "I'm working on it," he said tensely. "I know." She leaned forward. "But today I'd like us to talk about that day, the day of the explosion." Jake felt his heart accelerate. In all the months of therapy, they had discussed many topics: his childhood, military service, loss of comrades, his struggle with retirement. But this particular day, the day that changed everything, remained untouched territory. "Not yet," he said, leaning back in the chair. Dr. Chen looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "All right, It's your choice when you're ready. But let me ask, have you told anyone at the ranch the whole story? Lexi? Dawson? Dawson was there, Jake replied. He knows. But you never talk about it, do you? Jake shook his head. Even in their evening conversations with Dawson, they avoided this topic by unspoken agreement. I think it's time, Dr. Chen said gently. Not necessarily to me. Perhaps to Lexi. You can trust her. Jake felt a sudden surge of irritation. Why is this so important? What will change by talking about that day? It won't change the past, she agreed. But it could free you from the burden you carry. You can't change what happened, Jake. But you can change your relationship with it. After the session, Jake went straight to Lady's Corral. In 7 months since arriving at the ranch, his connection with the chestnut mare had grown into something special. She still had her moments of nervousness, still remembered past traumas, but now trusted him completely. "Hello, beautiful," he said, opening the gate. Lady approached, greeting him with a friendly snort. Jake took an apple from his pocket and held it out on his palm. She carefully took it with soft lips, then remained standing nearby, as if sensing his unease. He automatically began grooming her, finding comfort in the repetitive brushstrokes along her back. Dr. Chen's words spun in his head. Tell someone, trust, free yourself from the burden. It's heavy, you know, he whispered to Lady. A heavy burden, remembering that day. The mare turned her head as if listening. Her brown eyes met his, calm, accepting, non-judgmental. With a horse, Jake thought, it was easier. Horses didn't judge, didn't offer reassurance. They were simply present. Jake? He flinched at the sound of Lexi's voice. She stood at the gate of the corral, holding her medical bag. Sorry to interrupt, she said. Just wanted to check Phoenix's suture before leaving. Of course, he nodded. He's in the stable with Jenkins. She nodded but didn't move. Is everything all right? You look tense. Jake hesitated. Part of him wanted to dismiss it with the standard, everything's fine. But another part, the one that therapy with Dr. Chen was slowly opening, pushed him toward honesty. Tough session, he finally said. Lexi contemplated him for a moment, then opened the gate and entered the corral. Want to talk about it? She asked, coming closer. Lady didn't retreat, having become accustomed to her presence over months of cooperation. I don't know, Jake answered honestly. Lexi stood nearby, letting Lady smell her hand before gently stroking her neck. You know, she said quietly, when I first met you, you were like this young stallion, Phoenix, wounded, distrustful, ready to flee at the slightest attempt to approach. Jake couldn't deny this comparison. And now? He asked, not looking at her. Now you're more like Lady, she continued with a gentle smile. Still with wounds that will never fully heal, but stronger, willing to trust, at least some people. Their eyes met, and Jake felt a strange trembling inside. Over months of working together on the program, Lexi had become more than just a colleague. She was his support, his advisor, the one who believed in his vision when he himself doubted. Today, Dr. Chen talked about the day I was wounded, he said suddenly. Wants me to tell someone. Lexi waited silently, not pushing. Jake closed his eyes, afraid of what he might see in her gaze if he told the truth. It was in Helmand Province, he began quietly. We were escorting a convoy with humanitarian aid to a remote village. Standard mission. We had driven this route dozens of times. He took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in his voice. I was leading the convoy. Took command myself, though I had the right to delegate. But I always wanted to be at the front. His voice turned bitter. Pride, probably, or foolishness. He opened his eyes, but still didn't look at Lexi, instead focusing on the distant mountains. We were a mile from the village when the IED went off. Powerful, uncovered, placed right in the middle of the road, as if they knew we were coming. He paused, feeling memories returning with a vividness they hadn't had in years. My Humvee was thrown into the air. I remember the feeling of flight, and then nothing. He finally looked at Lexi, expecting to see horror or sympathy. Instead, her eyes were clear, attentive, calm. When I came to, everything was smoke and fire. I heard screams, saw that my driver mechanic, he was dead. The front of the Humvee just gone. He shuddered at the memory. My leg was trapped. I tried to free myself but couldn't. And then I heard gunfire. Lexi slowly placed her hand on his forearm, a light touch that grounded him in the present. We were attacked by Taliban from all sides. They had set up an ambush, used the IED to stop the convoy, and then, he faltered. 5 died that day. 5 of my people. 5 of my decisions. You couldn't have known, Lexi said gently. It was my duty to know, Jake retorted. My duty was to protect them. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to continue. Dawson saved me, pulled me from under the wreckage, though he was wounded himself. Called in air support, repelled the attack. He's the hero, not me. But you say you received medals, Lexi carefully noted. Jake laughed bitterly. Yes, for surviving an ambush, for losing men and part of my leg. He involuntarily clenched his fists. You know what's worst? Others, those who only know the official version, think I'm a hero. But I'm just a man who made a mistake and paid for it, with others' lives. Silence fell. Lady slowly touched his shoulder with her nose, as if sensing his pain. Thank you for telling me, Lexi finally said. Her voice was quiet but firm. And I understand why you blame yourself. But Jake, you know that in war, all decisions are always a lottery. You did the best you could with the information you had. It's not enough, he whispered. No, it's not, she agreed. It will never be enough for those who died, but it might be enough for you to continue living. She paused. That's why you're here, isn't it? Why you created this program. Trying to somehow compensate. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. It's a good way to honor their memory, she said, but not the only way, and it shouldn't become a prison for you. A prison? Yes, a prison of guilt and atonement. She turned to him, her eyes serious. Jake, what you're doing here is beautiful, but I want you to do it, not because you feel like you owe everyone, but because it gives you joy and purpose. Jake didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to object, to say she didn't understand. But another part, the one gradually healing, knew she was right. I need to check on Phoenix, Lexi said gently, releasing his hand. But if you want to talk later, thank you, he said, meeting her gaze. For listening. She smiled, and there was a warmth in her eyes that made something inside him tremble. Always. After she left, Jake remained with Lady, mechanically grooming the mare with long, soothing strokes. Strangely, he felt lighter, as if some weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Not completely. He doubted he would ever fully free himself from the burden of that day, but enough to breathe a little more freely. That night, Lying in bed, Jake pulled out a small box from under the bed. In it lay his medals, including the Purple Heart and Silver Star he received after Helmand. He hadn't opened this box since the day he arrived at the ranch. He ran his finger over the metal surface of the Purple Heart, feeling its weight. Then, after a long pause, he placed the medal not back in the box, but on the nightstand. A small gesture, but meaningful. The first step toward reconciliation with his past. The next morning, when he woke up, the medal was still there, catching the first rays of dawn. He took it, put it in his pocket, and then headed to the stable, ready to face a new day with a slightly lighter heart. Spring came to the Wyoming mountains, transforming the gray-white landscape into an explosion of green and flowers. Jake stood on a small hill overlooking the ranch, watching the activity below. The grounds of Last Chance looked completely different than on that first day when he arrived almost a year ago. A new stable stood next to the restored old ones, its freshly painted red walls standing out vividly against the green hills. The small program office now had a newly built therapeutic center next to it, with spacious rooms for individual and group sessions. The main house had a new porch that wrapped around it on 3 sides, and the cornerstone of the expansion was a new indoor arena for activities in bad weather. Jake took the Purple Heart from his pocket. For the past 3 months, he had carried it every day, not as a sign of heroism, but as a reminder of his journey and those who didn't return. The conversation with Lexi that winter day had been a turning point. After it, he began speaking more openly during therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, gradually releasing some of the guilt he had carried for so long. Today was a special day, the first official graduation ceremony for the Last Chance program. 6 veterans, including Jenkins, were completing their 6-week course of intensive therapy and rehabilitation. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Dawson was climbing the slope, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought I'd find you here, Captain," he said, offering one of the cups. Jake took the coffee gratefully, inhaling its aroma. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" he asked, nodding toward the ranch. "A year ago, it was just an old place I planned to sell. And a few horses who needed rescue," added Dawson, standing beside him. "Like some people I know." They silently drank their coffee, watching as the ranch awakened to life. Lexi was parking her pickup by the stable, and Dr. Chen was coming out of the therapeutic center, greeting veterans gathering for the morning group session. "You know," said Dawson after a long pause, "one of the things I've learned here is the meaning of mission, transforming your pain into something useful." Jake glanced at him. "From Dr. Chen?" "Yes," Dawson smiled. "Wise woman. Helped me understand that caring for these veterans isn't just a job. It's redemption, perhaps, for surviving when others didn't." Jake nodded, feeling a similar burden. They rarely spoke about that day in Helmand, though after opening up to Lexi, he found the strength to discuss it with Dawson as well. It was an incredibly difficult but healing moment for them both. "Did you also come to get a plan for the future?" asked Jake from Chen. Dawson hesitated. "She mentioned something, but I'm waiting for you." "For me? Yes, Captain." Dawson turned to him. "Our grant for next year requires certain changes. Dr. Chen thinks we need a special coordinator for veterans with disabilities." Jake understood. "And you want to take that position?" "If you think I'm suitable." Jake put his hand on the former sergeant's shoulder. "Dawson, no one is more suitable than you. You're already unofficially doing most of that work." A slight smile of relief crossed Dawson's face. Thank you, Captain. This matters to me. A sudden snort made them both turn. Phoenix stood at the foot of the hill, his black coat gleaming in the spring sun. The young stallion had fully recovered from his injuries and was now one of the most popular horses in the program. Temperamental, but with a huge heart. He senses the big event, said Dawson. Like all of us, better get back to work. When they descended to the ranch, activity was already ramping up. Jenkins was directing a small group of volunteers who were decorating the arena for the ceremony. Dr. Chen was coordinating the final group session, and Lexi was conducting last checks on the horses that would participate in the demonstration. Captain, called Jenkins, how do they look? Jake examined the blue and gold banners with Last Chance Ranch, therapeutic riding program for veterans, written on them. Looks great, Jenkins, he approved. Though I told you to call me Jake. Old habits, the young man shrugged with a smile. I wanted to show you something. He led Jake to a small corral behind the arena where an unfamiliar horse stood, a cream-white gelding with dark eyes and a gentle demeanor. This is Ghost, Jenkins introduced. Tomorrow, they were going to send him to the slaughterhouse. The owner died, and the relatives don't know what to do with him. He hesitated. I know we already have 15 horses, and there's no budget for additional ones. But you took him, Jake finished, not asking, but stating. Yes, Jenkins admitted. On my personal responsibility, I thought maybe I could take care of him, use part of my scholarship. Jake watched as Ghost cautiously approached the fence, curiously exploring his new surroundings. The animal looked healthy and strangely calm, considering the sudden change of environment. How old is he? Asked Jake. 10, in his prime, and very well trained. He was a leisure horse, perfect for beginners in the program. Jake slowly smiled. A year ago, he would have rejected such an idea, unwilling to take on additional financial burden. But now, he's beautiful, and we'll provide for him. Really? Jenkins' face brightened. Yes, Last Chance Ranch exists to give second chances. Jake stepped closer to Ghost, allowing the horse to smell his hand. For all of us. Jenkins wanted to say something, but suddenly faltered, looking past Jake's shoulder. Looking back, Jake saw Lexi standing at a short distance, watching them. I'd better go check the decorations, Jenkins quickly said, tactfully retreating. Lexi approached, her eyes immediately assessing the new horse. Another rescue? She asked, but there was no reproach in her voice. Jenkins found him, Jake replied. I just confirmed the decision. She softly laughed. At this rate, we'll need another stable by the end of the year. Maybe, he agreed, noticing dark circles under her eyes. You look tired. Tough week at the clinic, and preparations for today's ceremony, she sighed. But it's worth it, seeing these veterans change. I know, Jake softly agreed. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved from a professional partnership to a deep friendship, filled with mutual respect and something more that neither had yet dared to name. After hesitating a moment, he said, I have something for you. Not for the ceremony, just, well, what I thought. He uncertainly handed her a small envelope. Lexi took it with surprise, carefully opening it. Inside was a simple card with a drawing of Lady, drawn by one of the veterans' wives, who was a talented artist. Under the drawing were the words, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Lexi's eyes softened. Jake, without you, none of this would have happened, he interrupted, feeling sudden awkwardness. You were the first to believe I could do something more than just sell this place. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't do anything special," she finally said. "Just saw the real you, even when you couldn't see yourself." Jake wanted to respond, but they were interrupted by a loud bell, the signal that the ceremony would soon begin. "We'd better get moving," said Lexi, carefully folding the card back into the envelope. "But maybe after everything we could talk?" "Of course," Jake replied, feeling his heart accelerate. "I'll be here." The arena was filled with people, veterans, their families, volunteers, program coordinators, and even a few representatives from local press and funds that supported the project. Jake stood on a small podium, preparing to start the ceremony, but suddenly felt a strange nervousness. Public speaking had never been his strong suit. "Good afternoon," he began, trying to speak confidently. "Welcome everyone to the first official graduation ceremony of the Last Chance program. A year ago, this place was just a neglected ranch with 3 old horses and 1 lost veteran, me." Gentle laughter rippled through the hall. "Today," Jake continued, feeling confidence gradually returning, "this place has become a refuge not only for 16, he nodded to Jenkins, rescued horses, but also for dozens of veterans who have found their healing place here." He looked at the faces in the crowd, finding Dawson, Dr. Chen, Lexi, the program graduates, people who had become his new family. "Once, my Uncle Harry started rescuing horses to save himself," said Jake, remembering the words Lexi had told him so long ago. "I didn't know that when I arrived here, didn't understand the depth of his mission. But today I see that he left me not just a piece of land, he left a possibility of healing. Not just for horses, but for people who, like me, returned from war with wounds not all visible at first glance." He took the Purple Heart from his pocket, raising it for all to see. "I received this medal for what I lost, for comrades, for health, for a part of myself. For a long time, I hid it, not wanting to see or accept it. But thanks to our program, this place, and all of you, I've learned to wear it not as a burden, but as a reminder of the price of freedom, the importance of service, and the possibility to begin anew." He turned to the program graduates. "Each of you brought your wounds to this ranch, and each found your own path to healing. Maybe this path has just begun. Maybe it will last a lifetime. But today, I want you to know, you are no longer alone on this path." Applause filled the room, and Jake stepped back, giving the floor to Dr. Chen, who was to present certificates to the graduates. When the official part concluded, the demonstration began. Veterans showed what they had learned during the program, riding horses, performing exercises, demonstrating newly found skills and confidence. Jake watched with pride, standing aside when he felt someone approaching from behind. "Wonderful speech," said Bill, squeezing his shoulder. "Harry would be proud of you." "Thank you," Jake replied, "but I'm just continuing what he started." "Did a bit more than just continue," the old rancher noted, surveying the renovated ranch, expanded it into something much bigger. They silently watched the demonstration until Bill spoke again. "You know, when Harry left you this place, many thought it was a strange choice, a nephew he barely knew. But he saw something in you, even from a distance, and he was right." After the ceremony, when most guests had dispersed and volunteers were cleaning up, Jake returned to Lady's Corral. The chestnut mare, now older and wiser than when he first met her, approached him with a greeting. "Hello, beautiful," he said softly, stroking her neck. "We did it, didn't we?" Lady snorted, as if agreeing. Over the year, her leg had fully healed as much as possible. She still limped, especially in cold weather, but had learned to compensate, finding a new balance. just like he had. "Jake?" Lexi's voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned and saw her standing at the gate of the corral, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Thought we could celebrate," she said, entering the corral. Jake smiled, accepting a glass. "You're right, it's a big day. And a big year," she added, coming closer. In the evening light, her face was soft, the day's fatigue softened by the joy of success. They clinked glasses, looking at the ranch bathed in the golden light of sunset. "You know what I think when I look at this place now?" asked Lexi. "What?" "That sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful if given a chance." She met his gaze. "Like this ranch, like these horses, like you." Jake felt his heart accelerate. "And how am I?" "Grown," she simply replied. "Not just as a program director, but as a person. You've learned to accept help, to trust, to open up." He set his glass on the top rail of the fence. "And that's good?" "Very good," she quietly replied, also setting her glass aside. In a moment filled with possibilities, Jake hesitated. A year ago, he would have retreated, hidden behind walls he had so carefully built. But today, at the ranch that had become a symbol of new beginnings, he took a step forward. "Lexi, He stopped, searching for the right words. "Thank you for being here. For me. For this place." "There's nowhere I'd rather be," she replied, her eyes meeting his. Jake slowly raised his hand, carefully touching her cheek, a gesture as cautious as the first touches to Lady months ago. Lexi gently leaned into his palm, and the last barrier between them disappeared. Their kiss was gentle and confident at the same time, the beginning of something new, but built on a foundation of a shared year of growth and healing. Lady snorted and moved away, as if giving them privacy, while another day at Last Chance Ranch came to an end, a place where broken things found their purpose, where wounds healed, and where even the heaviest pain could transform into something beautiful and healing. Beyond the corral, against the sunset, Phoenix and Ghost ran side by side, their silhouettes merging in the twilight, a symbol of all that had been achieved and all that still lay ahead. The autumn sun colored the Wyoming hills in golden and reddish hues, creating a vivid contrast against the blue sky. Jake sat on the new observation platform, built on the hillside above the ranch, watching as Phoenix galloped across the spacious field under Jenkins' guidance. In the 8 months since the graduation ceremony, the young veterinary technician had transformed into an indispensable member of the Last Chance team. "He's ready," Jake said to Lexi, who sat beside him, holding his hand. "Jenkins, ready to take on more responsibility?" Lexi nodded, not taking her eyes off the rider and horse, who moved as one. "He's come an incredible way, as have all of us." The past months had been a period of transformation for the ranch. After the success of the first group of graduates, the program received not only additional funding, but also national recognition. An article in a major veterans magazine put Last Chance in the spotlight, attracting a flow of new participants and volunteers. The ranch had expanded once more. Now, there were 3 fully functional stables housing 22 rescued horses, a large indoor arena, a therapeutic center, and a new staff house where Dawson lived, having officially become co-director of the program. Jake squeezed Lexi's hand, feeling a peace that still sometimes seemed strange to him. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, 2 wounded souls learning to trust again. Now, 8 months later, they had found a balance that brought them both deep satisfaction. "Horace is coming today," Jake said, looking at the road leading to the ranch. "I think we should be there when he arrives." Major David Harris was a representative from the Department of Veterans Affairs, who was responsible for psychological assistance programs. His visit could mean significant expansion of funding for Last Chance. "Nervous?" asked Lexi as they began descending back to the main homestead. "A little," Jake admitted. "This is a chance to make what we've created here accessible to more veterans." When they reached the stables, Dawson was already coordinating the morning activity. A new group of 6 veterans was working with horses under the supervision of instructors. "Captain," he greeted, saluting with a half-smile that had become their personal joke. "Everything's ready for the Major's visit. Dr. Chen has prepared a presentation with the program results, and veterans from the current group have agreed to share their stories." "Great, Mike," Jake nodded, using the name he was still getting used to. Despite their officially equal positions, the old Army hierarchy sometimes manifested in their relationship. "Where's Lady?" "In the far corral with the new mare, Star," Dawson replied. "Seems they've become friends." Jake smiled. Lady, now one of the oldest residents of the ranch, had become something of a matriarch for newly arrived horses. The chestnut mare, who once trusted no one, now calmly helped new, nervous horses adapt to life at the ranch. "I'll go prepare the documents," said Lexi, squeezing his hand before heading to the office. Jake made his way to the far corral, feeling the need to check on Lady before the important meeting. Over these 18 months, the mare had become more than just a horse to him. She was a symbol of his own journey, from distrust to healing. Lady was indeed with Star, a young black mare rescued a month ago from a serious neglect situation. As Jake approached the fence, Lady raised her head and snorted in recognition. Even after all these months, his heart filled with warmth at this simple gesture of trust. "Hello, beautiful," he said softly, touching her muzzle. "How's your day going?" He extended his hand towards Star, who still kept at a safe distance. The young mare was thin, with numerous scars from mistreatment, but in her eyes, there was already a spark, a sign that traumatized animals at Last Chance Ranch quickly understood they were safe. "Give her time," Jake said to Star. "Lady was afraid once too. Look at her now." As if understanding his words, Lady moved closer to the younger mare, as if setting an example. The sound of an approaching car made Jake turn. A black government sedan was moving along the dirt road toward the main building. The meeting time had arrived. "See you later, girls," he said to the horses, and headed to the main house, where Lexi was already waiting in the yard. Major David Harris turned out to be a short, stocky man with piercing eyes and slightly graying temples. He got out of the car, surveying the ranch with an expression of professional assessment. "Captain Riley," he greeted, firmly shaking Jake's hand. "Glad to finally meet in person." "Thank you for coming, Major," Jake replied. "This is Dr. Alexis Foster, our Chief Veterinary Consultant and Program Co-founder." After introductions, they took the Major on a tour of the ranch, showing him the stables, arena, therapeutic center, and living quarters for veterans going through the program. Harris listened attentively, asked insightful questions, and took notes on a tablet. When they reached the program office, Dr. Chen was waiting with a prepared presentation. "Our program combines several therapeutic approaches," she explained, showing slides with data. "Traditional psychotherapy, animal therapy, group sessions, and a unique component we call mutual healing." "Mutual healing?" Harris repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Jake nodded. The horses our veterans work with are themselves victims of neglect, abuse, or other traumatic situations. In the process of helping these animals, our participants find a path to their own healing. Harris nodded thoughtfully. Many programs use animals in therapy, but your approach is truly unique. The statistics are impressive. 78% of participants report significant reduction in PTSD symptoms. 63% were able to reduce medication. 82% returned to work or education. And no cases of suicide among our graduates, added Dr. Chen. Compared to the general statistics among veterans with PTSD, this is a very significant indicator. After the presentation, Major Harris met with several veterans going through the program, listened to their stories, and then returned to the office for a final conversation with the leadership. "I'm impressed, Captain Riley," he said when they were left as a foursome. Jake, Lexi, Dr. Chen, and the Major himself. "What you've created here in such a short time deserves recognition and support." "Thank you, sir," Jake replied. "It was a team effort." "And I see that," Harris nodded. "That's why I want to offer not only increased funding, but also an opportunity to expand your model." He spread a map on the table. "The department would like to propose creating similar programs in 3 other locations across the country, in California, Texas, and North Carolina, with your program as the model and training center." Jake felt his heart accelerate. "This is an amazing opportunity, sir." "And a responsibility," Harris added. "It means you'll have to expand your role. Part of your time will be devoted to consulting and training other programs." "What about Last Chance?" asked Lexi, expressing the thought that immediately occurred to Jake. "Your program here will remain the flagship," Harris assured. "But you'll need to delegate more day-to-day operations to free up time for training and consulting." After Major Harris's departure, Jake, Lexi, Dr. Chen, and Dawson, who joined them later, sat on the porch of the main house, discussing the proposal. "It's an incredible opportunity," said Dr. Chen. "Think of how many veterans we could reach." "But can we maintain quality if we expand so quickly?" Dawson doubted. "We've created something special, precisely because it's a small, focused program." Jake remained silent, listening to the arguments, his thoughts racing. Harris's proposal was a dream, a chance to help many more veterans than they could at one ranch. But Dawson was right. There was a danger of losing what made Last Chance special if they tried to do too much too quickly. "What do you think?" asked Lexi, touching his hand. Jake took a deep breath. "I think we need to grow, but do it right, on our terms." He stood up and approached the edge of the porch, looking at the ranch that had become not just his home, but his mission. "Maybe instead of 4 locations at once, we could start with 1 additional, create it as a pilot project, make sure we can maintain the same quality before expanding further." "A sensible approach," Dr. Chen nodded. "And where might this first location be?" Jake exchanged a glance with Dawson. "California, closer to major military bases and medical centers." "And who would run it?" asked Lexi, though understanding was visible in her head. "Jenkins," Jake replied, "with Dawson as a mentor, at least initially. And I'll travel there often enough to ensure our philosophy is preserved." The discussion continued until late evening, with the plan gradually taking shape. When Dawson finally went to his house and Dr. Chen drove to her home in town, Jake and Lexi remained alone on the porch, watching the stars. "Are you sure you're ready for such a change?" Lexi gently asked, intertwining her fingers with his. "You've worked so hard to create this place." Jake pondered, his gaze finding the constellation of Orion, which was beginning to rise in the autumn sky. "When I first arrived here, I thought it was just a piece of land I would quickly sell," he said quietly. Then it became a home, a mission. But now I understand that Last Chance isn't just this place. It's an idea, an approach, and if we can spread it, help more people find the same peace I found here. Not. He turned to Lexi, her face softly illuminated by light from the windows. Last year you said I had grown. I think part of that growth is understanding when to let go, to allow something greater to develop. Lexi leaned closer, her head resting on his shoulder. What about us? You'll be traveling a lot if you take on this role. We'll manage, Jake said confidently. Besides, you also travel a lot with your practice. True, she laughed. Maybe we should open another veterinary clinic in California. Jake turned to her. Are you serious? Maybe, she met his gaze. I've been thinking about it. My practice here is stable. Jim and Sarah can run it most of the time. And opening a branch near the new ranch would make sense. Jake felt his heart filling with something that could only be described as hope, a bright, spacious feeling he had hardly known before coming to the ranch. You would come with me? He asked, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. Not permanently, she clarified, but we could find a balance, something that would work for both of us. Jake embraced her, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. You know, he said after a long pause, it's been almost 2 years since I inherited this place. Sometimes I still wake up and wonder how my life changed so much. For the better, I hope? She asked with a smile in her voice. Much better, he confirmed, kissing the top of her head. Uncle Harry left me land and 3 horses, but really, he left me a chance to find myself, to heal, and now, an opportunity to help others do the same. The next morning, Jake woke early and, as always, went to the stable before breakfast. He stopped by Lady's stall, and the mare greeted him with a quiet snort. Good morning, beautiful, he said, stroking her neck. Big changes ahead, but good ones, I think. He led her out to the corral, allowing her to move slowly in the morning air, her limp barely noticeable these days, just a slight tremor on every 4th or 5th step. As the sun rose over the eastern hills, Jake sat on the bottom rail of the fence, watching Lady graze. His hand automatically touched the purple heart in his pocket, a habit that now brought comfort rather than pain. So much had changed. So much would still change. But some things remained constants. Rescued horses, veterans finding their way back to life, and a ranch called Last Chance, not as a place of despair, but as a symbol of hope and new beginnings. When Lexi came out of the house and waved to him, Jake felt something inside him finally align, as if the last piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. He still carried scars from the war, just as Lady still limped from her wounds. But now they both moved forward, not despite their wounds, but because of the wisdom those wounds had brought them. And ahead lay new horizons, new ranches, new rescued horses, new veterans who needed the same chance for healing that he had found. Jake Riley, once a broken captain who saw no future beyond his trauma, now looked forward with clear vision and an open heart, ready to embrace whatever life might bring. And Last Chance Ranch continued its simple but profound mission, to be a place where even the most broken souls could find a path to light.